Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Claw, Resurgence by Katie Berry, narrated by Knox. Chapter 1. Wind-driven snow skittered past the tall windows of the Lawless City Hall, rattling at its aged panes as if seeking entry. Austin Murphy was about halfway up a tall stepladder which stood next to a towering blue spruce in the lobby. He looked out at the winter's day and shivered slightly. It had been bitterly cold and snowing heavily for the past couple of days, just like the weather office had forecast. With a shake of his head, he turned his attention back to the task at hand. "Don't drop this star, and don't fall either," Christine Moon said from below, stretching up and holding out a multi-pointed Christmas star toward him. Reaching from the ladder to retrieve the proffered ornament, Austin smiled down at Christine. "I'll be careful, Chris, thanks. I have done this on a couple of different occasions over the years, you know." With Christine steadying things from below, he carefully negotiated his way back up to the top of the ladder, placing the silver star firmly atop the apex of the pungent spruce. Despite being in a pot, the magnificent tree was quite tall and voluminous. Initially, the conifer had been planted during a city hall remodeling many decades before, and was now so large that there was talk of having a tree-topping service come in to prune it. "That's good. I wouldn't want the new mayor of Lawless to fall and hurt himself just before the holidays," Christine responded with a grin. With Mayor Bob Nichols missing in action, along with Councilor Ray Chance and Chief Reggie Van Duzen, a new civic by-election had been held in the spring. After the earthquake damage in January, the town had had its metaphorical hands full with the number of critical systems and structures that needed to be fixed and upgraded. Just getting the damage repaired on so many buildings around town had been an enormous undertaking, and Austin was glad most of the work was now done. Thanks to his city works crew, along with help from the valley's citizens and their hard-working, ready-to-tackle-anything attitude, almost everything that needed doing had gotten done just before the first snow of the year. Austin had been working so hard on everything that Christine had joked that he should run for mayor. That had gotten him pondering things, and after a bit, with some additional egging on from Tripp, Austin had put his name into the mix, since his desire was to get the small mountain town up and running again as quickly as possible. He'd made that his platform. With Tripp's help, they'd planted numerous signs around town that said, "Murphy for mayor, let's get her done." After that point, he hadn't canvassed door to door or anything like that. In fact, he'd almost forgotten about it, so busy as he was just doing what needed to be done around town. Then, during an all-candidates debate, he had a particularly good showing, after reiterating his pragmatic principles. During the subsequent election, it seemed that his organizational and managerial skills, along with his hard work, had not gone unnoticed by the local residents. When all the votes were finally tallied, Austin had won by a landslide. Shaking his head in disbelief as he thought about his new position, Austin stepped carefully down to the lobby floor as Christine continued to steady the ladder. "Yeah, breaking my neck would put a damper on things, that's for sure." He smiled in thanks for her assistance, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. His feelings for Christine had grown stronger and stronger over the past several months. She had been there each day, working next to him every step of the way, and they had grown quite close. Her job as ladder steadier complete, she was currently focused on poking through a box of Christmas decorations at the moment, looking for just a few more ornaments. The way she wrinkled up her nose as she poked around the box was just the cutest thing Austin recalled seeing in quite a while. He nodded slightly to himself and smiled again. Yes, he was definitely falling for this woman, and wondered if she felt the same. "Hey there, Captain Kirk," Christine said. Austin shook his head, bringing himself back from his flight of romantic fancy. "Sorry, Chris, what was that?" "You looked like you were way out in space there for a second." "Oh, yeah," Austin said with a sheepish grin. "Just thinking some thoughts." "Good ones, I hope," Christine replied with a smile, then handed a couple of ornaments destined for the tree to Austin. "Always," Austin replied, temporarily mesmerized by Christine's smile. Moving back to the spruce tree, He found himself holding 2 red glass globes, one in each hand, and began looking for some empty branches. This cherished tree had survived the quake unscathed, one of the few things to have been so lucky. The damage to the city of Lawless last winter had been phenomenal, and many people were still recovering from its effects, both physically and psychologically. Then, just last week, the town had been put on edge once more, when another, smaller trembler occurred, centered along the north end of the valley, near the Kootenai Glacier like last time. Fortunately, this new jiggler had only rattled the windows around town, unlike the 7.8 magnitude shaker back in early January. Wondering if he should be concerned for the town's residents, Austin had checked with his geologist friend down on the coast, Jerry Benson. Jerry had been quite reassuring and said that what they'd felt was most likely some delayed subsidence, just the ground settling, which it sometimes did after a major quake, often many months later. So technically, Jerry had concluded, the shift in the ground was a very minor quake, and likened it to Mother Nature getting comfortable and settling in for the winter. And that is what many people were doing as well, including Christine. Though busy with her own conservation office tasks, despite the falling snow, she had volunteered, with Austin, to decorate some of the public-owned buildings around Lawless. So far today, they'd managed to decorate the interiors of the Community Health Center and the Lawless Police Department. Thanks to Christine's assistance, they were almost done. It was less than a week before Christmas, but this was the first chance they'd had to have anything resembling seasonal normalcy around the small mountain town since the incident. At their backs, a gust of wind and snow blew into the lobby, and Trip Williams rolled through the revolving door. He was finally back from his errand, a white shopping bag bearing the Home Hardware logo draped over one snow-covered arm. This, no doubt, contained the new string of Christmas lights Austin had requested. Slung over Trip's other arm was a clear, wide-bottomed plastic bag. A box was nestled inside, the kind that usually contained a dozen donuts, many of which were, no doubt, honey crullers awaiting immediate consumption. In his hands he held a cardboard tray with 4 Tim Hortons coffee cups inside. "Hey guys, look what I have!" Trip seemed excited to be the bearer of tasty treats and Christmas cheer. He held them out to Austin and Christine and looked down at the tray, saying, "There's a dark roast double-double in the mix, so don't anyone take it by mistake. It's for Willie Jr.'s trial by fire tonight." "Thanks, big guy. I appreciate it," Austin said, being careful to take the cup with DD written on top and not the DRDD for Willie. While he was there, he grabbed the shopping bag of tree lights from Trip's overloaded arms. Christine removed a cup labeled ST, which contained her steeped tea. With a large smile, she said, "Thank you, Trip, but you didn't have to go and do that." Trip smiled back, appearing to blush his usual beet red beneath his beard, just like he did every time he interacted with Christine. If it wasn't for the tops of his cheeks peeking through, nobody would have been the wiser. Trip placed the donut box and his coffee on the information desk for a moment. As he brushed the snow from his shoulders and shook out his toque, he said, "The tree looks good, guys, and nice job with that star, Mr. Mayor." He picked the donuts up and flipped the lid open, offering them to his friends. Christine declined and held up her tea, saying, "I'm fine, thanks." Austin took a Boston cream and said, "Thanks, Mr. Public Works." Trip had been promoted to head of the Public Works yard in Lawless after Austin had been elected mayor. And although Austin missed the everyday, hands-on nature of his old position, he knew the functioning of the town was in good, if slightly sticky hands, with Trip now running the show. Shaking his head, Trip lamented, "You know, I just gotta say, it's not the same anymore without you down at the yard, boss. Willie Wilson Jr. just isn't as funny as you are." "Well, thanks, buddy. It's nice to know my fantastic sense of humor is appreciated. I'll try to drop by more often to keep things lively around there for you." "Speaking of the yard and stuff that still needs to get done, Mr. Mayor," Trip said, now sounding serious, "we've really got to get things moving on the Sinclair building." Until the January quake, the Heritage newspaper building had been in the early stages of renovation by the city. Thankfully, it had been constructed of more sturdy materials like City Hall and the hospital, and it hadn't suffered much during the shakeup. Located across the street, the Bank of Montreal, unfortunately, couldn't make the same claim. Despite its own heritage status, the bank's building had to be condemned due to structural instability issues, mainly because of its sinking 3 meters into the ground during the quake. The Sinclair building was a beautiful old brick and stone structure that the city owned, having been bought in the early 80s after the Sinclair Corporation's bankruptcy. The Lawless Heritage Committee had wanted to save the old newspaper building if they could. Some renovation of its structure had already been underway, but after the quake, the foundation had needed some additional corrective procedures before anyone could use the building again. Once everything was completed, the city had planned to use it for office space rentals below and condominium apartments above. Several interested tenants were already lined up to occupy the building once it was completed, and now it just had to get done. One of the issues plaguing the town's reconstruction had been the recent report from the city comptroller's office. It had pointed to many instances of financial irregularities over the last few years regarding the town's budget. Apparently, this was due to ex-mayor Bob Nichols and his cooking of the town's books. Thanks to his numerous embezzlements over the years, the post-quake renovation budget for the city had to be severely reduced. As the new head of city works, Tripp now had to ensure that the remaining things were done ASAP and as economically as possible. With snow on the ground now and fog in the air soon, most outdoor renovations were on hold for the next several months until springtime. And so, it was now time to get inside jobs like the Sinclair building done. Fully aware of all these facts, Austin asked with interest, "Okay, so how are things going at the Sinclair anyway?" "Not bad, but I had to pull Willie off working cleanup at the place so Larry and I can have some time off from plowing that mess on the roads out there. Anyway, I need to hire another body to help out with some grunt work for a week or two until just after the new year. Someone to move old cartons of newspapers and other paperwork up from the basement to go to the shredders, along with throwing out old office furniture and stuff like that. So, I was wondering if you knew of any young fellas out there that could use some more money, especially with the holidays coming up and all." With an appreciative nod and smile, Austin replied, "Thanks, Tripp. I'm sure Alex will appreciate the work, since he has a lot more expenses now, what with his new ride to fix and a girlfriend to boot." Alex had just bought himself a used 1995 Toyota Tacoma off a neighbor of theirs, and had been looking for another part-time job to provide more of a financial fix to his new automotive habit. "That would be great, even if we can just get that basement cleaned out before this year is over. I've already got a dumpster in the alley behind the building that Alex can use to throw out the basement crap." Austin glanced at his watch. It was almost 3 o'clock. "Alex might be wanting to start today after school, if you text him now and ask him." Glancing out the front doors at the gusting snow, Tripp agreed. "That's a great idea, and there is no time like the present. I'll text Alex from my truck before I head back to the works for a bit. Willie is ready for his first solo shift on the Citrus Express this evening, and I want to make sure he's up to speed on everything before he pulls out." At Tripp's behest, Austin had hired Willie Wilson Jr. at the public works yard several months before. Tripp had told Austin that he felt sorry for the kid, what with his dad getting eaten, and the fact that the young fella didn't have anyone else in the world. Austin suspected it was also because of Tripp's own life, living as he did with the stigma of being orphaned at an early age himself. Though Willie wasn't the fastest learner, Tripp said he was honest and a hard worker, and just needed a little guidance now and again. And so, Willie had been hired on, through a work training program offered through the province of BC. The program paid half of his wages for the first 6 months, which had been more savings for the cash-strapped city. Fortunately, Willie worked out fine and had recently gone full-time at the yard as Tripp's assistant. Tonight was his first shift driving the Citrus Express around the town for the evening, sharing the shifts with Tripp and Larry and giving the other men some extra time off at home each week over the holidays. "All right, tell Willie I said hi, and thanks again for the coffee." "You bet, boss." Tripp flipped open his donut box and offered it to Christine one more time. She demurred and held up her tea, saying, "This was great. Thanks, Tripp." Giving a quick thumbs up to Austin and Christine, Tripp said, "Catch you guys on the rebound," then revolved out the door with his remaining donuts and coffee. After a sip of her tea, Christine turned to Austin and said, "Are we still on for dinner tomorrow?" "Of course," Austin replied, excited to be taking Christine out somewhere, just the two of them. He'd asked her out to the newly reopened Frostbite Fred's for a meal now that the place had been fully renovated and repaired from the damage of the bear attack and the quake. Over the last 10 months, things had seemed non-stop, and although Austin had wanted to get to know Christine better, he just hadn't had the chance. So now, with things slowly getting back to normal, he looked forward to the opportunity. "Listen, do you have a second?" he asked. "Well, I was just going to pop out to Geraldine Gertzmeyer's place to check on how she's doing. What's up?" "Follow me." Austin led her to the office of the mayor on the second floor of the building. It was a lavish affair, covered in rich cherry wood paneling that absorbed most of the light and made the room seem quite dark and mysterious. Even with the drapes pulled back, revealing the brilliant whiteness of the blustering snowstorm outside, it still seemed dim inside the office. "So, what did you want to show me?" Christine asked as she took in the ornate room. "Well, it was in here." Austin moved to a painting on the wall and swung it open like a cupboard door, revealing a small safe with an electronic keypad on the other side. "Cool! How did you figure out the combination?" "I Googled it, of course." "Googled it?" "Sure, I found the name and model number." "And you got inside just like that?" "Well, not quite. I found that there was also supposed to be a bypass key." Austin pointed to the top drawer of the desk and added, "Found it right in there, next to the paper clips, with the drawer unlocked as well." "Ah, yes. High security in small-town BC at its finest, huh?" Christine said with a smile. "It's a regular Fort Knox around here." Austin inserted the key into the wall safe and pulled out a bundle of old newspapers tied together with twine. "Those were inside?" Christine asked incredulously. "Who keeps old newspapers in their safe?" Austin handed the bundle to Christine, saying, "Apparently the ex-mayor of Lawless did. Oh, and I found this in there as well." Austin reached into the safe and pulled out 8 tall stacks of bills. Christine's jaw dropped, and she said, "Oh my, are all of those $100 bills? How much is that?" "Comes to a nice tidy 80 grand. "Wow! What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to have the comptroller listed as a city asset and put it into the town's coffers, since we need the money." "That's very boring, but very responsible. Good call," Christine said with an approving nod. "Thanks, I thought so. Not to mention the fact that most of that money presumably belongs to the city anyway, thanks to Mayor Bob's financial shenanigans." Christine pulled the leather office chair out from behind the desk and asked, "Before you give it all away, may I sit at your new desk, touch your stacks of cash, and check out some of those papers, Mr. Mayor?" She batted her eyelashes and smiled demurely, adding, "I've never seen that much money in one place before." With a hard swallow, Austin tried to reply casually, "Oh, of course, any time." Inside, he was dealing with an accelerated heart rate, but hoped it didn't show too much on the outside. Christine's piercing blue eyes were almost hypnotic as they regarded him. He was on pins and needles at the thought of their upcoming dinner date. After the dinner portion was over, he planned on taking Christine to the Winter Solstice Smackdown. That was the town's name for their new winter festival, which ran all weekend starting tomorrow. Austin and the rest of the city council had wanted to have something to celebrate the grand reopening of Lawless, and the Winter Solstice Smackdown had been voted into existence as just the ticket. Turning on the green banker's lamp situated off to one side of the expansive mahogany desk, Christine sat down and untied the bundle of papers. More than just newspapers, it also contained several letters. Holding them up, she queried, "Love letters?" "Well, you'll love to read them, that's for sure," Austin replied, but would say nothing more. Christine looked briefly through the newspapers and noted that they were all from 1895. "Wasn't that the year when the gold rush started around these parts?" "Yes," Austin said, then added, "That's the year it really took off. But it turns out it was also the year when the big fire happened, amongst other things." "Fire?" "Yep, almost the whole town burned to the ground." "Really? I never knew that." "Neither did I, and I've lived here my whole life. However, I do remember that my grandmother mentioned once that her father had told her there had been some very dark times in Lawless many years before, but would never say what they were exactly. That's curious. So they covered up this fire? Seems that way. But who were they? It could have been the company that used to own the building that Tripp is now renovating. Christine returned this news with a momentary blank stare, then said, "The Sinclair building?" "Yes, the Sinclair Development Corporation owned a surprising number of things in this town up until its bankruptcy in the late 1980s. Remember that big disappearance I told you about a while back that always fascinated me? The one that happened on New Year's Eve, back sometime in the early 80s near Entwistle, right?" "Yes, that's the one." For some reason, he'd always been fascinated by things like the Roanoke Colony, the Mary Celeste, and, of course, the Sinclair Resort incident, being among some of the better-known ones. He added, in addition to owning the ski hill, they also owned the local newspaper and several other businesses before they went bankrupt after the lawsuit. Something like $1 million or $2 million per person plus damages, wasn't it? It ended up costing the company everything it had, as far as I know. A college friend of mine is going to be looking into that, actually. Austin's eyes widened in interest. Really? You'll have to fill me in on all the details sometime. You know how I am about learning what happened there. Don't worry, I'll keep you posted. Tapping the papers on the desk, Austin said, "Regarding Lawless, I find it interesting that the same company that couldn't cover up a mass disappearance like an Entwistle was able to cover up a fire that destroyed an entire town, as well as other assorted oddities that occurred here a century and a quarter ago." Other oddities? You'll have to borrow those and read them at your leisure. There's lots of good stuff inside. Such as? Such as, supposedly, parts of what is currently the Sinclair building survived the fire, and the newspaper business established there was built up around it. Before that, it was one of the West Kootenai's biggest saloons, the Golden Nugget, and they were big enough to influence whatever they wanted in this town, such as covering up the fire. Austin added, "As you know, if enough palms are greased," Christine continued his thought, "or enough people were permanently silenced." She shook her head dolefully, adding, "And it's not like it can't happen in real life. Look at what almost happened to me." All too true. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I've got some paperwork I need to take care of before the holidays start. You'd better get going. I don't want you to suffer the wrath of Geraldine Gertzmeyer. Thanks. She was expecting me this afternoon, and daylight is wasting. The snow outside the window now appeared almost horizontal, and it scoured across the glass from the wind. She looked back into the room and said, "And besides, I wouldn't want to miss out on any of her cookies." "When you get back, you'll have to grab a mug of cocoa to sip on while you learn some of the forgotten history of Lawless." "I'll have to do that. Have you read all of these?" "Enough to get the gist of them." "And?" "Burying secrets around this town is not a new thing." Chapter 2. The snow was getting heavier than ever, and the wipers on Christine's Dodge Ram were losing the battle to keep the windshield clean. Gusting winds that rattled at the truck added to the excitement, making the drive out to Geraldine Gertzmeyer's a little more challenging than usual. Still, she mused, it was nothing like the snail's pace she'd have to drive if this were fog instead of snow. Then again, that would be the case in the valley soon enough. Just after the new year, the fog would probably be back and sock in the valley for more endlessly drab months. At least, that's what the locals said, and after last winter, she believed them. With a smile, Christine realized it was just part of living in the beautiful West Kootenays of British Columbia, and she was more than happy to put up with it. This was especially true right now, since she was feeling part of the local community around Lawless more and more, finally getting to know the residents. During the reconstruction, Christine had repeatedly witnessed people going out of their way to help neighbors in need. Just seeing everyone pitching in where they could to get the town up and running again after last winter's horrors was a beautiful thing. The way the people came together, as they did around these parts, made her proud to call the small mountain town of Lawless her new home. Another gust of wind rocked the truck, and Geraldine Gertzmeyer's laneway suddenly came into view. Christine had been lost in thought, and due to the blowing snow, she hadn't noticed any of Geraldine's friendly little signs along the way. Since the January quake, the elderly woman had added another sign to her collection, this one attached to the towering oak tree at the entrance to her property. Mostly obscured in snow right now, it was still legible, however, reading, "Private property. Nothing is allowed here. Just go home." "You know how to make a girl feel welcome," Christine said, smiling. Knowing the elderly woman as well as she did now, she was always surprised by how friendly the senior was, despite her unfriendly signs. When she'd asked her about it over cookies and tea a while back, Geraldine had replied, "Gotta keep up appearances, dearie." Apparently, Norbert, Geraldine's late husband, had been a bit of an old curmudgeon and liked the privacy that their acreage afforded them. He'd never been particularly friendly to strangers over the years, unlike Geraldine, who had always enjoyed opening her house to visitors. Christine suspected it was especially so now, after Norbert's passing a few years back. However, for a woman as mature as Geraldine, easily in her mid-90s, she was as spry as some 60-year-olds that Christine had met over the years, showing no sign of mental deficit. She was still quite independent and required minimal assistance from the outside world. Christine had formed a close bond with the woman over the last few months, and regularly took her into town to grocery shop since Geraldine didn't drive, and apart from Trip Williams, she had very few people to help her after her husband's passing. Geraldine invariably repaid Christine's kindness by treating her out to lunch at the burger barn, and Christine, being a sucker for a good cheeseburger, couldn't refuse. The house came into view through the blowing snow, and Christine slowed to a crawl, marveling at the lights. "Good job, Trip!" As if the man wasn't busy enough around town with the reconstruction going on, Trip had found enough spare time to renovate some of the damage to Geraldine's porch and help her decorate for the holidays as well. The bedazzling array of lights on display, while not quite the level of Clark Griswold, was still an impressive sight to behold. String after string of almost every colored light imaginable was on display, blinking and twinkling away. She shook her head in amazement. It must have taken Trip dozens of hours in his time off to do this much. Pulling the pickup truck around the circular laneway, Christine brought it to a halt in front of the wide porch steps that led up to the front door. The steps looked to have been swept a short time ago, but the snow had already filled in most of Geraldine's work. At the top, a broom stood propped against the thick wooden porch railing that ran along the front of the house and wrapped around both sides. Christine took the broom and brushed the snow from her uniform pants and boots first, then gave the steps a quick sweep as well. She knocked on the door, using its heavy cast-iron knocker, currently framed by a green wreath of pine boughs and holly, then turned the knob and pushed the door open. A frail voice called out, "It's open, dearie." "It's Christine Moon, Mrs. Gertzmeyer. Sorry I'm—" She trailed off, her jaw dropping open. She was almost tempted to turn around and see if she was in the correct house, since it certainly didn't look like the same place she remembered from when she was here only a couple of weeks ago. Christmas now ruled the Gertzmeyer household. Dozens of wreaths, resplendent in their greenery, were on almost every wall. They intermingled with bough after bough of berry-covered holly, which peppered the walls like an indoor climbing vine gone crazy. Strings of Christmas lights graced the crown molding that capped the top of each wall, making the room a delight for the eye wherever a person looked. A large fir tree stood in the center, glowing brightly with dozens of strands of lights, its branches laden with hundreds of antique china ornaments. On top of everything else, the house smelled heavenly, the scent of gingerbread filling the air, giving Christine an overwhelming sense of happiness, tinged with just a touch of sadness. Though it was wonderful to see a person who enjoyed the season so much, at the same time, it made Christine feel a hint of melancholy for her own family Christmases that were now long past. "I'll be right there," Geraldine called. While Christine removed her boots, a rumbling sound came from the hallway, and Geraldine Gertzmeyer wheeled her tea cart into the room, using its handle in lieu of her walker at the moment. "Merry Christmas, dearie." Geraldine's face lit up, and she held one arm up in the air while the other one held the cart, signaling to Christine she would like to hug her. Christine complied and enjoyed the elderly woman's comforting embrace.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?